We might be on introduction part 37. We don't know.
Yeah.
We'll see how it goes.
No, we can't do that. Bisexual lighting.
You're listening and you have thoughts and you want to share them with us. And we love that.
Oh, sure. Put me on the spot. Why don't you?
Susie sells seashells by the seashore.
No, she doesn't.
Because it's going to be great. And I think you're going to enjoy the heck out of it. Welcome, everybody, to Write Out Loud, podcast on writing, storytelling, authorship, and all of the creative arts that go along with that. I, of course, am Matt Kassem. I'm here with the lovely, the amazing, the stupendous, the incredible, and the just, I don't know, mystical Christina.
I think this is going to be a new theme. You have to come up with a new word every time you introduce me. I mean, this is just, I don't know what to do with this anymore. Mystical. I do like that one.
Mystical.
I do like that one. I do
Mystical.
like my fairies and my, mystical creatures.
That works. That works. I love it. Well, we're back together again, but we are joined by a very special guest. And that guest is, would you like to introduce your guest there, Tina?
Yes, this is a very, very dear friend from my publishing days. Her name is Erin Galloway, and she is the director of publicity for Berkeley, which is an imprint of Penguin Random House. Welcome, Erin.
Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I am delighted to be here and chat with you.
That's awesome. Well, Erin, tell us a little bit about yourself and just kind of your background and anything that you feel like, you want us to know about you.
Yeah, my road to publishing was a fairly straightforward one. I went to college for communications and, like a lot of people thought that I wanted to get into journalism. I ran my high school newspaper. I ran my college newspaper, which was a fantastic experience. And then I did an internship at the local newspaper in the city where I went to college. And what all of that taught me is that I liked being in charge of a newspaper. I did not actually want to write for a newspaper. I remember very distinctly having this conversation with my mother during my senior year of college because I had applied to something like 7 grad school programs. Half of them were master's in journalism programs. And then I realized I didn't want to write for a newspaper. So that was a bit of a problem. And she said to me, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I want to be in charge." That was like from the depth of my soul, that answer came out. And she said, "Yeah, well, you can't be in charge immediately upon graduating, of course." She said, "So I get it. You don't want to write for somebody else. Do you even really want to write?" And I thought about that and I said, "Yes, but I don't think I want to do it for a living." And I wasn't really sure what that meant yet. I knew that the written word was going to in some way be part of my job, but I didn't feel like creative writing was necessarily my path. And I wasn't really sure how to take all of the writing that I had been doing and transition it into a career. And it was a professor of mine, actually, that said, "Erin, have you ever thought about going into a publishing master's program?" And I said, "Well, I would never be able to do that. How? I don't live in New York City. You have to live in New York City to work in publishing." And this was true at that time because this was now nearly 20 years ago. And I said, I just don't think that's even possible. And he said, "Well, I think you should apply to a couple of programs and see." So I did. And it was excellent advice because once I actually went and toured some of the schools and the programs, I realized that the publishing master's was the only one I wanted. And in fact, I only wanted to go to New York City and to Pace University's publishing program, which I did. And it worked out so well because while studying there, I got a fantastic internship at the now dearly departed Dorchester Publishing, which was an independent mass market commercial fiction publisher that existed for a number of years and that gave me and many other fantastic people in publishing their start. And the great thing about working for such a tiny house is that I wore like 8 different hats. I got to do a whole bunch of different things, having no clue at the time, because it was my first job, that I would really need to ultimately specialize. So I actually began my career as an editorial assistant. And it was a great experience. I had a wonderful boss and team of people around me. And several months after I started that job, the head of publicity in the publicity department that we had, left the company for another opportunity. And one of the higher ups said to me, "What do you think about moving into publicity?" And I thought that was, the dark side of book publishing, if you will. It was all about promotion. It wasn't necessarily about the written word anymore, at least in my mind at the time. And I wasn't so sure about it. But he had a very strong way of putting it. It wasn't perhaps the most tactful, but he said to me, "Erin, your mouth is far too big to stay in editorial." And what he really meant by that is like, you are a champion of books. You are so enthusiastic. You're so passionate about what you love. I really think you'd be best utilized in a publicity or a marketing role. And I thought, well, do I still get to have close relationships with authors? Like, that was very important to me. Do I still get to be intimately involved with the kind of, creation of a book, the lifespan of a book, if you will? And yes, of course I would. I would be there right from the beginning, from the moment of acquisition or even before acquisition, getting excited about a book. And then, what I always say is I fall in love with great books, and then I help other people realize they should fall in love with them too. That's my whole job.
I love that.
That's
And,
awesome.
It's not that different than the way an editor falls in love with a book and becomes its champion. I do the same thing. It's just that instead of working really with them on, kind of the line by line, the concept editing, instead, I'm the one that just gets to flail all over the place about how amazing it is and do that professionally in a public way with, media contacts. So it really wound up being kind of the perfect pathway for me. I got to try editorial, realized pretty quickly that it wasn't exactly the right fit, but then publicity was. I slid into that, as naturally as a second skin. And now they can't get rid of me. After a couple of years at Dorchester, I moved over to Berkeley. And Berkeley was a house that I knew I wanted to wind up at eventually, specifically because Berkeley published so many of the romance writers that I adored. And it was my dream that I would get to work with a number of them. And that dream came true. I came to Berkeley in 2009, and I've been there ever since.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
For those of you who don't know Erin, just the way you described, what that boss at Dorchester said about you, I actually don't recall you being the editorial assistant. I only have known you as publicity.
Yeah.
And I just can't imagine you doing anything else, because he's right. You're such a champion of books and you do it so naturally. So it doesn't feel like, oh, okay, she's diving into, the publicity here. For those that don't maybe, aren't as familiar with Berkeley, can you maybe talk about some of the genres they publish and such?
Yeah, we are a commercial fiction publisher. So we do everything from romance to women's fiction to mysteries, thrillers, science fiction, fantasy, horror, and even a little bit of literary fiction occasionally. So basically, if you read it before you go to bed at night, if you read it while you're at the doctor's office, if you read it on the beach, if you read it standing in line at the grocery store on your phone, we publish it.
Yeah.
If you want to escape, we publish it.
Yeah.
That's great.
When I was working at Borders and I was the commercial fiction marketing gal, I called it the fun fiction. Like, all
Oh,
of the
yes.
fun fictions that like you said, take to the beach, take to, read for fun.
Yes.
Although, my point of view, I don't care if it's fun or if it's learning. I think, reading gives you something that other things don't. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I think you can learn something from any book, no matter what that book is. And I think the fun thing about commercial fiction is the learning is a little less obvious.
Yeah.
If I pick up nonfiction, I am in the mood to learn. I'm going in with that exact intent. I like to think that with the commercial fiction, we sneak it in there sometimes.
Yes.
And that's okay.
That is the truth. That is the truth.
We both in, if you will.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
There are those moments where you're reading that book and it's like something happens that you identify with that just, maybe it's sort of happening in your life now, right? And they
Yes.
sort of finesse it a little bit that you're just like, oh man, that's okay. I know what I need to do. Like you sort of take a lesson from it, even though that may not be what you
Right.
intended,
Absolutely.
Or even just
pretty cool.
discover something about yourself. I mean, Matt and I talked quite a bit in season 1 of our podcast about representation within fiction and how important it is to see yourself in that. And I think there is more opportune times. And again, an easy way of going in there and just discovering a character, like you pick this book up for fun and suddenly you're seeing yourself in there, or you're discovering something that a character found out about themselves and you're like, oh my gosh, that's me. That's me. So I think there is something really
absolutely.
wonderful about it. So let's go back into, again, maybe for audience members that don't know the difference between publicity and marketing. I think a lot of people, Matt is raising his hand. I think a lot of people,
like me.
I think a lot of people kind of think of them as the same thing. So can you give us a little bit of what the differences are?
Oh, sure. And I will say sometimes the lines blur, especially depending on, the kind of publishing house and who does what, because there are probably roles that like the marketing team does at my company that at a different company or a smaller company, publicity might do. So it does depend. But in general, what we call publicity is typically things called earned media. And when we say earned, we mean earned by like your own time, blood, sweat, and tears. And that really just means that any booking I'm able to get for an author, whether that is a review, an author featured in like a roundup of, the hottest books out this month, blog reviews, a feature in a newspaper, whether that be local or national, an author appearance on the radio, a podcast, or TV. Any of that is earned through my pitching. Like those are not paid opportunities.
Gotcha.
I'm earning that based on, my outreach and the relationships that I'm able to leverage. Because hopefully, if you're, a good publicist that has been working for any amount of time, you are developing relationships with media contacts, and then you're using those relationships to go back to people that you've built up a good rapport with to say, hey, you trust me. I know what you like. And I have this book that I really think that you're going to enjoy and that will be important for your audience. So that's really the kind of difference, is that I'm going after things that are earned that can't necessarily be bought. It's a little bit of an oversimplification to say that publicity is unpaid and marketing is paid. But that kind of makes it a little easier for people to understand, because marketing can include things like advertising. And that can be advertising anywhere. That's advertising from the ads that you might see in your local newspaper to ads on podcasts, radio shows, blog ads on, TikTok or Instagram, or even, a major ad in like a magazine or big, national daily newspaper. And marketing, of course, includes a lot of other things like direct newsletter outreach and social media. I mean, we do a lot of our marketing on social media and digitally, and in fact have, dedicated staff members that just work digitally. And we certainly have some overlap sometimes between our two departments where, there might be a relationship that I begin developing with a person because initially they are a media contact. But over the course of their career, they may transition into what we would call an influencer, someone that's mainly talking about books on a social media platform as opposed to being, a kind of classic media contact at, a newspaper or even, a full-time blogger. Because I know a number of bloggers that have transitioned from blogging to really influencing. And great. I mean, we'll work with you in whatever capacity, you're covering books, but it may transition. I may no longer be the person that you're in touch with. It may become a person from our digital team. And that's just to kind of keep a natural breakdown of we only have so many people working in the publicity and marketing departments. So we have to kind of spread the wealth in terms of who does outreach. But in general, my job is earned media placement and then things like, planning a bookstore events that an author might be doing. So that can be, full on formal national tours, or it can be, a couple of smaller events. And by smaller, I just mean more regional. So not necessarily traveling the author extensively. It could be just partnering with their local bookstore. I set up a lot of signed pre-order campaigns so that authors can work with a local store and, hopefully get their pre-order numbers up and just, kind of drive excitement for the upcoming book that they have. And of course, I also oversee, like if we have a presence at a conference or a convention, easy examples would be like San Diego Comic-Con, New York Comic-Con. There's so many reader and kind of fan, conventions, as well as festivals and all sorts of different opportunities for authors to appear in person. So in some way, either me or someone in my position is kind of handling all of them. It's generally a publicist.
Wow.
That's awesome.
The scope of what you do. I mean, that's incredible. Maybe break it down a little bit. I mean, maybe not like on a day-to-day basis, but maybe a weekly basis. Like what's the typical day in the life of? I mean, it sounds like you're constantly talking to people, emailing, but yeah, what do you?
I mean, I think one of the things that I like about this job is that no 2 days are exactly the same. The responsibilities are certainly similar or cyclical. You know what you'll be doing every week in one way or another. You're pitching typically a number of different books because, of course, you're working on many books at a time. So you're always pitching media, whether it be the book that's coming out 6 months from now or the book that's coming out a month from now. And what that pitching looks like will vary because you can't pitch Cosmo to cover a book that's coming out next week. You have already been pitching Cosmo for 8 months, so you're pitching them very far in advance. Whereas with a blogger, for example, their lead time is quite a bit shorter. So you might be pitching them 2 to 3 months before a book comes out. Local radio works on an even tighter schedule. You might be pitching them 4 to 5 weeks before a book comes out. Podcasts really vary because a lot of podcasts run seasonally now. So we try to kind of hit them about as early as I would normally hit like a long lead magazine. So like a Cosmo or, a Good Housekeeping or a GQ, those we're reaching out to very far in advance, kind of in the 6 to 8 month range. And podcasts, we do that too now because so many of them have to really plan their seasons out far in advance. That's sort of the main pitching, I would say. And in addition to that, that's sort of how I look at the media pitching. Then there's the other pitching, which would be events. So if I have an author that, I know is going to do a local event and maybe lives in an area where it's very easy for them to drive an hour and get to another major market. Okay, great. Maybe we can do 2 markets that are close to home. So I'll be pitching, bookstores pitching bookstores that I think are ideal, for that particular author for whatever reason. For example, I work with a lot of romance authors. So of course, I'm looking for bookstores that have a really strong track record of doing great romance events. And we are blessed to have a number of romance-only bookstores in the United States now, which is a true thrill because that was not true, even 8 years ago. But now we have a number. But in addition to that, so many other bookstores have become really strong supporters of romance, particularly in the last 5 to 6 years. So I know the best bookstore in St. Louis, Missouri to host a romance event. I know the best bookstore in Washington, D.C. to host a romance event. And I'll work with those stores to, hopefully bring my author there. And we have similar, situations. If you write horror novels and we publish you, we know the stores that are appropriate for that. We certainly know where to send science fiction fantasy authors. Seattle is definitely the motherland in many ways. And Pacific Northwest just does really, really well with science fiction and fantasy and urban fantasy. So it's, using all of the sort of knowledge that I have or that any publicist has to go out and to get as much media as we can, as well as whatever, event line that we are looking for. And then, we're also pitching authors for opportunities like, festivals or conventions that we think would be a great fit for them. San Diego Comic-Con and New York Comic-Con are certainly popular ones, but there is also Emerald City Comic-Con. There is C2E2 in Chicago. There are so many events and things that are taking place constantly, not to mention literary festivals, that we're always trying to keep our eye out for what could be a fit.
New. Yeah.
What's new, what's popular, what is gaining like more of a groundswell in terms of support, because new events, come around pretty much every year. Someone will launch a new type of event in one city or another. And sometimes they're one-offs, but sometimes they become annual events. And as publicists, we're always keeping our eye on what's happening, how people are responding, how many readers are attending, and is the audience right for our, authors? And oftentimes, yes, So we're always trying to be mindful of what can we do that will get our authors in front of as many eyeballs as possible, and the right eyeballs, the kinds of people that are going to be interested in reading whatever the book is.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It sounds to me when you started describing, all of the various things and the time, like you must have this like massive calendar on the wall of like book 1, 6 months out, 3 months out. It's just a massive undertaking. And I'm sure that you've got a long list of authors, that you're working on too. So it's like you've got to, on one hand, keep the time. On the other hand, you've got to keep like the number of books and their time. So, wow.
Yeah. We have for new publicists coming in a very specific kind of timeline grid that we give to everyone when they begin. And it is to help them understand really the lifespan of a book. Because, for me, it is second nature, but it should be. I've been doing it for a really long time. I say now, like just a predisposition to know the exact time in which things should happen. I have like an internal time clock that's like, did we do this? Have we done this? Where are we on this? We should already have it done by next week. But yeah, I better after doing it for nearly 2 decades. Whereas somebody new coming in, it's a lot to keep a pace with. So we do have a really clear outline for everybody to kind of plug their books into and really understand, oh, okay, here's the process. And it feels a lot less overwhelming when you're able to plot it all out on a calendar and go, oh, okay, this is when I'm pitching these. This is when I would pitch these books. Because you're not pitching a book one time. You're pitching a book constantly. I don't pitch one book a week. I pitch every single book that I am working on every week in one way or another. Maybe I'm sending slightly more pitches out one week for a particular romance in the weeks leading up to Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
Because I know that media goes for lowest hanging fruit.
Yeah.
So your media outlets are going to look for Valentine's Day coverage for a number of these romances. Great. So I'm going to really weight a bunch of my outreach to that, where, I would maybe weight obviously I'd be weighting my Mother's Day pitch for a whole variety of types of fiction to closer to May, naturally. So you're just sort of figuring out your own natural cadence as a publicist, but then also being mindful of what each book needs, what's normal in the lifespan of a book, and keeping in mind what's happening in the world. So can you tie something to particular, dates, or obviously beach reading, summer reading, vacation reading, Halloween and scary season. These are all things we try to keep in mind so that we can take advantage of them for our authors.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things you had said too was, there's constantly things kind of popping up from events and different types of, conferences or what have you. Are there any, I guess, would you say, are there any kind of innovative new types of things that are popping up that are, or that you've seen very recently that you're really kind of excited about, that maybe is different than what you've done before?
It feels like things are always changing, and yet in other ways, things stay the same. It's kind of the nature of publishing. We are a very unique animal, and publishing is in some ways a very antiquated system, and in others is in constant shift. So it's a very, unique dichotomy to work in an industry that is, in many ways very old and has a very set way of doing things, and it can take a long time to change the way that those things are done. And I mean more processes as opposed to anything else. And yet, because we are part of the media landscape moves at the speed of light. So we are trying to kind of vacillate between these two somewhat extremes. And it is a very unique place to be in. When I came into the industry, I would say that kind of digital coverage of books was really starting to hit its moment. Blogs were popping up all over the place. And certainly blogs are still all over, and new romance blogs and kind of general commercial fiction blogs launch almost every day. But sort of boom of the blog, I think, has plateaued. And the boom that we see now is much more on social media. A couple of years ago, it was Instagram. That was the end all be all. You wanted images of your book on Instagram, artfully arranged with, photos of coffee or delicious treats. Or what was my other favorite one? Sock Sunday. That would be people in socks with books. Really fun stuff. And, now it's TikTok. And that's been true for probably the last 2 to 3 years. And, every so often there's going to be a new thing. And for us, how do we capitalize on it? Whatever it may be? And there's plenty of people that will tell you that they can sell you, the magic bullet to going viral on TikTok or going viral in any way. And there is no magic, route to doing it. And we've had so many people ask us, how do we get this book all over TikTok? And the truth is, I have no idea. I have absolutely no idea. The things that hit big on social platforms that are not covered by a celebrity, for example, because, in that case, it is what it is. But if they're not being covered by a celebrity, and even that's not a guarantee, but really it's organic reach. It's somebody that says something that other people find interesting, and it just grows. And, you know, a perfect example would be Ruby Dixon's Ice Planet Barbarian series.
Yeah. Yep.
Those
Yep.
already great fun and selling well. Ruby had been publishing those for years when they hit on TikTok. And all of a sudden, she and those books were everywhere. And I mean, no one was more delighted than her, but it was certainly not something that she tried to make happen or ever expected to happen. It just happened. And, you know, then she came to us and said, you know, are you guys interested in the print rights so that we can get these out to a much larger audience? And of course we were. We were thrilled. So we've been able to, you know, bring them to, you know, your local bookstore. Colleen Hoover is probably one of the most obvious examples. Colleen had been publishing for years to quite a bit of success, and then really hit the next stratosphere on TikTok. And it was sort of funny to me. And, you know, I had friends that in my life that I would say are readers, but are more of what I would call like the buzzy readers. Like they're the readers that are picking up books because they hear people talking about it on like the news or, you know, on whatever, like Instagram, you know, channels that they follow. And I remember somebody saying to me, like, have you heard of this Colleen Hoover? And I'm yeah. Hearing of Colleen Hoover for over a decade. Where have you been? But again, this is not a person that's in publishing, not immersed in books every day. So of course they weren't aware. You know, so outside of social channels, podcasts are certainly, you know, kind of the I would call like more, I don't know if traditional media is really the way to phrase it, but the maybe one of your kind of broadest, you know, and fastest growth kind of media channels. But I will say that the challenge with podcasts for commercial fiction has been that so many podcasts don't interview authors unless they are a podcast focused on writing, which of course makes sense because if you are a podcast that is focused on, you know, certain lifestyle topics, for example, interviewing an author might not necessarily make sense for you unless, you know, the author is, for example, you know, say you're covering like wellness in whatever, you know, form looks like. It's just such an easy catch-all term. But if you're covering wellness, you could have a million different experts on from all different areas, but they are probably nonfiction writers. So a fiction writer, it's a little bit more difficult. You know, if you are maybe a fiction writer that talks a lot about creativity, maybe you can wind up on a podcast where you're talking about creativity. But in general, I find it is a little harder unless you're going for more of a really specific audience. So podcasts that cover, you know, horror, obviously that's perfect for horror authors. If you are talks a lot about mystery thrillers, great. We're going to be pitching you for our mystery thriller authors. And clearly on the romance side, we have no shortage of fabulous podcasts. So we work with a lot of for our romance authors. But in terms of your kind of, you know, what I think of as some of the top podcasts that you'll find if you go to like full, you know, podcast section, like most of our fiction authors that are writing probably are not going to wind up on, you know, those on a regular basis because they just don't have as fiction authors appearing.
Yeah.
Sure.
So, you know, I know you talked about the whole going viral and Colleen Hoover and Ruby Dixon and stuff. That aside, because we know that's success. That's, you know, where you kind of go. But how do you like measure success? And by that, I don't mean like, you know, again, the viral stuff goes viral. We know that's success. But what are the types of things that you would be like, okay, this is a win. This is a win when we get this, or this is a win when we are able to do this.
Yeah, for publicists, our wins typically come in the form of media. So that'll be, you know, if I can get an author a New York Times book review, obviously that's fabulous. That's like a great white whale. Other, you know, kind of brass rings would be Washington Post review or interview, USA Today, you know, review or coverage in a meaningful way. A morning show interview, obviously, would be fabulous. So Good Morning America, the Today Show, those are obviously major wins. An interview on a night show. I mean, any interview like for books with Jimmy Fallon is fabulous. Seth Meyers is great for books. The Tonight Show is good for books. The Daily Show is good for books. Those are, of course, the most challenging places to place your author. But that is why they're like holy grail items. They are the things that you want the most as a publicist. But there are so many other things there. NPR, whether it's, Fresh Air or Weekend Edition or WBUR's Here and Now or NPR.org, which of course has the book concierge and so much other fantastic book coverage. And then there are, major women's magazines, major men's magazines, entertainment magazines, People magazine. There is no shortage of fabulous outlets that I would love covering my books. That's for sure.
Yeah. So I guess, for maybe authors that are new, they've got a first book out, maybe they're just starting. What advice can you give, like how to best work with your publicist? If you're working with a traditional house, or maybe you're indie and you're going to hire a publicist, or you're going to try to do your own publicity, how best can they work?
Yeah. I mean, whether you're working with an in-house publicist that's provided to you, or you've chosen, to hire someone yourself, the most important thing I think is to come to, your first conversation with that person with some goals in mind, or at least a wish list, because it's really helpful for the publicist to know what you're aiming for. Trust me, your publicist is going to have goals of their own, because I always come in like with my own set of goals apart from what the author wants. I have things that I really want to satisfy myself. A lot of those things will likely dovetail with what the author wants, but some things, like I may not even tell the author necessarily that I'm going for, because they're like brass rings that the author might not even have in their site yet, but I do. But it's helpful to come in with a wish list. Now, here's where I tell you the truth. Your publicist may need to manage your expectations, because if you are a very first time author and you're saying, I really want to be on the Today Show, well, I mean, my answer to that is like, yeah, I want $1 million, but it's not likely for a very first time author to be on the Today Show with their very first book. It just isn't. And that's okay. But if you can come in with some sense of, here's what I'd really like. I really wish, for this novel that I could get a review in, I'm from St. Louis. I really want an interview and a review in the Post-Dispatch. Great. Those are really normal and appropriate goals. Fantastic. I'd really like to get a local NPR interview. Awesome. And having that sense of what you want provides a jumping off point. It allows you to have a conversation around what's important to you. I also think it's really handy if you can come in with thoughts about, what makes your book stand out? Why is it special? What about this book is going to capture readers? And like, look, I'm not asking you to rate your, my pitch for me, but I want to know why you as the writer feel so passionate about this book, because the reason you feel passionately about it is the writer is different than the reason I feel passionately about it. Because at the end of the day, I'm just what I would call like an expert reader. So I'm thinking the way a reader would think, and then putting on my publicity hat and saying, okay, now what, angles can I be using to pitch this book? But you as the author, like, know what your inspiration for the book was. There might be all sorts of interesting like tidbits that I'm unaware of. We have a book coming up this summer, and the author shared with me, one of the things that really inspired this book was my experience moving from a very small town to a major metropolitan area. I'm an introvert, and I had to learn how to make friends as an adult and create a whole new community for myself. I'm,
Oh,
at a really challenging time during a pandemic. Like, how do you do that? And I thought, oh, that makes perfect sense how that informed your character's journey. Because, of course, I'd already read the book. I had my own thoughts and feelings about that character's journey, but that was a whole new layer that I got to add on. And that really helped
yeah.
us when we started formulating pitching. So having some of that like background information to share with your
Yeah.
publicist is invaluable because that informs our pitches and gives
Yeah.
us a lot of, ideas.
Yeah. And makes the pitch more interesting for the media on the other side. Because,
Oh, yes.
you just explaining that about the author, I mean, I'm interested in the book, so I
Right?
can imagine
Yep.
someone receiving that pitch, in media, in print or whatever, would be like, oh, I can do something with that,
Mhm.
Mhm.
and actually while you were talking, it also reminded me Valentine's Day locally where I live, Larissa Ione was on our local news. And I'm like, she
How
lives here.
amazing.
And again,
Yep.
it does make it really interesting. So those are some really, really great ideas on how to work with your publicists to make their job easier, to make the media's response easier. And even, give some ideas to those indie authors that maybe aren't
Sure.
familiar, with what to do for publicity. Um,
Oh, absolutely. And on the kind of hiring an outside publicist angle, I always want people to kind of go in armed with as much information as they can because you want to hire the best person for you, right? So I
Yeah.
always say, contact several different people, ask for quotes, and ask them for some references. Talk to people that they have worked with in the past and that they're working with currently so that you can get a really good sense of, is this person's style going to work for me? Because, you want to be sure that you're going to be happy. How often are you going to hear from this person?
Mhm.
What are they going to be doing for what you're paying for them? Because the truth is, no one can guarantee you anything. And if they're
Mhm.
promising you that they can't be entirely truthful because it's not paid. You can't guarantee, anybody anything because you can't pay for a New York Times book review. You can't pay for a major morning show
Yeah.
appearance. So you really want to understand what their pitching is going to look like. And you want to make sure that what they are proposing to you feels realistic to you. Does it seem appropriate based on the timeline that you have? If they're talking about, major daily newspaper coverage, but we're 2 or 3 months out from publication, that's going to be really hard to get. Starting from scratch. So just really making sure that you feel like what you're getting in the proposal is realistic, that the price point feels realistic for you, because these are not inexpensive services by any means. And I just want everybody to go in prepared to, spend whatever it is they're comfortable spending and feeling like they are really getting something for that invest of their, hard-won resources. Because there are plenty of good and successful, freelance publicists out there. And you just want to make sure that you're picking the right one for your book, that they have an expertise in the area that you're writing in, and that they have really solid media relationships. And if you can see evidence of that and evidence of great bookings that they've gotten for other authors, ideally in the very recent past, then, proceed. But I just want everybody to have some sort of like bumpers in mind or standards so that when they, kind of do their outreach and try and find the person that's right for them, they feel informed.
Yeah, that's awesome. I do have a question about you because something you said just sort of tripped it in my head. And, you mentioned like, of course, I've read the book. And so I have sort of an idea of what this is, right? Like there's only so many hours in a day.
Yeah.
How many of those hours do you spend reading?
Yeah, I wish I could say that I got to read during work hours. Not true. No publicist reads during work hours. We all read like, in our personal lives. So yeah, and that's true for editors too. No editor edits during their workday. So like, I mean, I say that the homework doesn't go away when you get a career in publishing because you are always reading for work. If you're not reading a book that you're working on, you're reading a book that like one of your colleagues or your direct reports is working on. I mean, I try and read a number of the books that my direct reports work on so that I can talk intelligently to them about, the strategy for the books that they are working on and be sure that we are able to come up with the best campaign possible. And then I also read books that we don't publish, yes, for fun, but also to kind of know what else is out there so that I'm really aware of the marketplace. I will say that in some ways it was easier pre-pandemic when I was commuting into the office every day because that was 2+ hours of uninterrupted reading time every single day on the subway. And it is different now that I don't commute into an office every single day. So my reading looks a little bit different. I mean, I still read all the time. I can't really not read. I mean, I think if you work in publishing, it's because you can't imagine doing, anything else.
Yeah.
Sure.
But yeah, so it is a lot of reading. That is for sure.
Awesome.
But when people ask me like biggest perk of working in publishing, I always say like all the reading material one could desire.
Yeah. I just need to take this little snippet of this conversation to my accountant so he can understand why it is I've got this, budget for books.
Oh, if only, right? Like people just don't understand. And the accountants do not seem to get it. It's rude.
No.
Well, that's awesome. Well, listen, this has been fantastic and really, really excited that, you chose to join us and kind of share your wealth of knowledge with us. Is there anything else that you think we should know?
Well, I can't leave without sharing a few fabulous books that I'm very excited about coming up.
Yes.
Please
And this
do.
feels a little mean because they're not on sale yet, but they are coming soon-ish. So the first book I'm really excited about because it's a debut novelist and, well, I love talking about debut novelists. So this book is called When I Think of You by Ariel, and it's a really knockout debut. If you love like deeply emotional romances and are a fan of Jasmine Guillory and, Kennedy Ryan or even Carly Fortune, then I think this book is for you as a reader. It's a second chance romance between Kalia Wilson, a receptionist at a film studio, and a hotshot movie director, Danny Prescott. They were classmates in film school. And after years behind the reception desk, a movie studio, Kalia's dream of being a film producer seems incredibly far away. So when Danny, the man who broke her heart in film school, says he wants her to join him on the most important production of his career, the real-life love story of his parents falling in love in the Jim Crow South, she knows she cannot turn down this opportunity. And as they work together to make this really emotional movie, they start to open up to each other and, of course, rekindle that very special connection that they had years before. But Hollywood politics and scandal threaten to sink the production, and both of them will have to decide what they are willing to do, both for their careers and for love. And like the heroine, the author, Maya, moved to Hollywood with big ideas and dreams, only to find herself answering phones for 4 years as a receptionist at Universal.
Wow.
Thankfully, went on to do something even cooler. She earned a master's degree in specialized journalism for the arts from the University of Southern California, where she now works as chief program officer of a research center for Black media and social justice, which is amazing.
Wow.
That is
wow. That sounds really good.
Yeah.
I think you're going to have to give me a list once, we're off this podcast of all of these books.
That's fair.
Yeah. What else you got?
And the other one, because you mentioned that you were intrigued by the author whose novel was informed by her experience of, moving to a major city, in her case, London. I have to tell you about this book, The Love of My Afterlife. And this is like my pick for the summer because I know that this book is going to be like, I very much got the tingle when I read it. I just know that people are going to fall in love. It's like Emily Henry meet The Good Place and Fleabag, like
Oh my
all rolled
God.
into one. A recently deceased woman meets the one in the afterlife waiting room and scores a second chance at life and love if she can find her Mr. Right back on Earth and get him to kiss her consensually before 10 days are up. A wild premise, I know. So it's about this woman, Delphi, whose life was forgettable and whose death is a complete embarrassment. After choking on a microwavable hamburger, she meets the hottest man she's ever seen in the afterlife waiting room. And the two share a moment, but then he's abruptly sent back to the land of the living. And when she is offered the chance to return to Earth to find this hot, mysterious stranger, obviously Delphi grabs it. But to find one man in London, a city of millions, she has to ask for help and be brave enough to open herself up in ways she's never been able to do before. This book to me feels like the things that I love about Beth O'Leary and Emily Henry, in that the book is at the same time aspirational and entirely relatable. You know, the
Nice.
author has woven together these like themes of loneliness, grief, self-discovery, all into a rom-com that is just filled with laugh out loud moments. And it packs a very surprising emotional punch. Because it explores like, you know, deeper questions about like love and life and even death, but it has the, you know, comic appeal of your favorite rom-com movie. So it really reminded me of the film Bridesmaid, actually, in you come for the irreverent humor, but you realize the book actually has something like deeper to say. It's like a heart squeezer. That's like the best way that I think I can describe it.
Wow.
Oh,
Again,
that's awesome.
that sounds really good.
Yeah.
And last one I will tell you about something a little bit different. Fantasy is obviously, and romantasy in general, are kind of all the rage at the moment. And a book that I would say leans a little more fantasy, but I really think will have a lot of appeal for romantasy readers, comes out this summer, and it is called The Night Ends with Fire by KX Song. And it's this very sweeping romantic fantasy that is Mulan meets the Poppy Wars. And the author was indeed inspired by the legend of Mulan. And it's a really empowering depiction of feminism. It has a snarky dragon, which I love. And it involves like a fabulous love triangle. It's just one of those books that I can't wait for people to pick up, you know, because it really examines female power and what happens, not just when a woman wants power, but what she does when she. And I remember I think I connected with this book because I remember being in a women's leadership program 5 or 6 years ago now. And we were all asked to like circle on a page. There were all these different words and they kind of represented different values. And we were all asked to circle the kind of key values, the things that were the most important to us. And there was a very long list, you know, let's say 30 to 40 terms. And the instructor asked us to raise our hands for, you know, certain words. And of course, there were many words, like lots of people, you know, their hands went up. And the last word she asked was, who circled power? Me and one other woman in the room raised our hands. And I thought, that's so weird. Why isn't everybody raising their hand?
Yeah.
And then we had a very interesting discussion because it turned out that's exactly what the professor was expecting. And she wanted to have a conversation around like, why is it scary for us to want and ask for power? And of course, one of the things that a lot of them had to say is they've seen too many masculine people misuse power. And so there was this like notion it was bad to want it. But I really liked this book because of that idea of like a woman who is desirous of power and what she can do with that power and the challenges that come with power. I just thought that was such a great way, to explore a tale. And I'm really excited, to see how people respond to it.
Heck yeah. It sounds incredible.
So yeah, I mean, now I feel like I've teased you with books that you can't quite get yet, but they're all available for pre-order. And I think if people are going to love them, I'm excited.
Yeah.
That's
When
awesome.
we will post this with our social media and stuff, and we'll put a link to, I guess, maybe a Berkeley page that might, have upcoming stuff on it so that they can click the links to pre-order. That would be great.
Great.
Yeah, 100%. Well, Erin, thank you so much again. Oh, God, it was a treat to have you here. And this was such a fun discussion. I learned a lot because there's so much I didn't know.
Yeah. And,
as often happens.
I actually felt like I learned a lot too. I mean, this was a great conversation, and our listeners are probably a little shocked because normally we're much more interactive, but it was because there was so much to learn. And I just wanted you to be able to tell us what you know so that we can pass that information on, to our listeners. So thank you so much for coming on.
Yes.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. I mean, talking about books is my day job and certainly one of my greatest joys. So always happy to chat about books in the publishing industry.
Well, fantastic. Again, it's been a delightful conversation with Erin Galloway, the Director of Publicity for Berkeley, which is an imprint of Penguin Random House. So thank you again so much for your time. It's been a complete and utter pleasure.
Oh, thank you both. Take care.
All right, bye. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to the podcast. We really hope that you're enjoying every bit of it, but we would love to hear your feedback. Drop us an email either to matt@writeoutloudpod.com or Christina@bookmatchmaker.com. We would love to hear your thoughts. What's working, what's not working, and what do you want to hear more of? Thanks so much. We really appreciate it.